Hey, it's me again. Oh, I'm so bundled up, but it's like 61. It's balmy 61 degrees outside right now. Um, yeah, beforehand I'd consider it cold, but I'm in Ohio winter mode for some reason. Like, my Ohio genes kicked in and it's 61 today, but by Wednesday it's supposed to be covered in ice and below freezing again. But it's very nice and balmy out. I'm still wearing like my hoodie sweater thing. Although if this was Ohio, I'd be like in shorts and t-shirt traipsing around. Like when it was 60 degrees in Ohio, like everybody just wore shorts. Like yeah, this it snow's melting. We're just gonna wear some shorts. It's crazy. So we are currently waiting for the dividend, and I thought it would be fun to discuss some of the history and some of the history and how it relates to drilling technology, and advances in drilling techniques and demand for stuff, which is a lot more recent than what you would imagine it to be. And if you're as old as me, then this has happened fairly recently to you. If you're older than me, it's happened even more recently to you. If you're young, let's say you're only 18, then this has always been usually, as far as you know, this has been the case for you. But let's talk about geology and drilling techniques and how they relate to things, and reports and articles that you might see from pre 2004 are pretty much like not the case anymore. While we wait, so I went traipsing around the south end of the East Newark gas field the other day. So where I live in the Barnett Shale of Texas, and I'll pull up a map here of the Barnett Shale. I live in the Barnett Shale. I live on this cusp where oil and gas kind of meet. And it meets here because of what's called the Llano uplift. It depends where you are. It's either Llano uplift, low Llano uplift if you're like a local to the Llano, or Llano if you're Spanish. A few other faults, but primarily it's the beginning of the Fort Worth Basin. And we're going to talk about the Barnett Shale today. We're going to do other Texas shales. And then I have a friend who lives down at the Eagle Ford, and this is where I've seen them, really work on stuff firsthand, is down at his place in Eagle Ford. He's supposed to get me pictures of his equipment. So there was, drilling and stuff. Marathon took it over in 2015. Marathon took over his property, which is pretty cool. So all of his property's Marathon now. And Marathon's put in new wells. I think next time he gets a new horizontal well in, I will try to get some pictures and video and stuff. And I'll try to go down there when they're drilling and working on it, so I can bring that information to you. Part of the reason why his property is now successful is because of this advance in drilling technology. So he lives down in Eagle Ford, and then, of course, I'll talk about the Permian Basin, too, and the Oro Grande Basin, and everything else. So this is going to be like a geology series and a drilling technology series, and a bit of history, because then you can get, like, a perspective of, like, oh, why did this land sit for 20 years, or whatever, right? Because things are a lot different now than they were 20 years ago. Why does my face look so fat in this? My face looks so fat in this for some reason. I don't know. Like, sometimes my face looks really skinny, but, like, I put on, like, the budgie suit, and, like, ooh, my face is thin, and this is, like, ooh, it's, like, more, like, okay. So let's talk about the Barnett. I live in the Barnett Shale. And, the Barnett Shale is known as, like, the original shale, the granddaddy of the shale plays, more or less. The granddaddy of shale plays is the Barnett here in Texas. We have different spots of Barnett. I would live in what's considered the southern Barnett, but USGS says that it extends a bit farther south. So USGS is the only publicly available, like, estimation reports you can get Otherwise, you have to go with the company's estimation reports, which differ than the USGS, because USGS only accounts for current reserves that can be extracted. It doesn't account for potential reserves, which are private, based on a per company basis. It doesn't count previously extracted reserves because they're no longer there. So with the Barnett Shale, the USGS estimates that there's a lot of gas. The USGS assessed technically recoverable, which means they can pretty much do it. Continuous, that's unconventional resources for 2 areas defined in the Barnett Shale, resulting in total estimated means, that's your average, of 53 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, 172 million barrels of oil, that's not that much oil, 176 million barrels of natural gas liquid. There's, all right, 172 million barrels of oil, that's not too much more oil, but there's a lot of gas, so where I live, it's very gassy. Although where I live, it's like the cusp of oil and gas. And the oil is largely undeveloped in this particular area. The only, where I live, more or less, the oil is pretty well underdeveloped. If you look at this report, it'll tell you that the area of a horizontal well is about, the drainage is about 200 acres worth around the pipeline. So the rock, that's pretty good. The rock is decently porous. Where I am in the Barnett, and it talks about this. The gases kind of freely move around. So let's get into that. Why do these gases kind of freely move around in the shale? Aren't gases supposed to be trapped? All right, and here I'll see if I can pull it up. This is a picture of naturally fractured shale rock. So if the rock is naturally fractured, the gases can kind of move around, which is good because it allows for more drainage of an area. So now we're going to go into a bit of drilling history. For a long time, this is how you drilled for oil. And this is how it first started. Actually, the first wells in America, if you read about them, basically they went like 60-something feet and then they struck oil. It was very like shallow. So basically for a long time you had to go pretty shallow. We're talking like 1800s here. Think that movie, There Will Be Blood. So, this is like your old derrick here. You put it in a well and then boop, and then you kind of suck it up. You have this little pocket and you kind of hopefully suck up all that oil. And that's what you did for a while. And hopefully there's enough porosity and fractures in the rock naturally that kind of, drain that area. Or you're in a big pocket that was just sitting there with oil and you could get it out. That's what originally how it was. And then we got better at drilling. More or less we got better at drilling because steel improved in America. We had great advances in metallurgy. Rolled steel especially contribute a lot to the natural gas development. But now we're talking oil. So you had oil, and for a while they didn't really care about natural gas. Believe it or not, they didn't. They just kind of let it go out. In Ohio and Lake Erie, if you look at the history of natural gas, it would basically which is funny because they talk about Lake Erie, which it's always been polluted. Like natural gas would kind of seep out into the lake and it'd bubble up, and the natives would say, "Look at this, it's crazy. It's bubbling up." And that would just be like a natural gas seep coming out. So Lake Erie's always been polluted. It's been like the dumpster of the Great Lakes. I don't know if I'll include that. This is undergoing a lot of editing. I'm rambling on about polluted lakes and rivers. That's not oil. So then pipe, advances happen and stuff, and all of a sudden now you can drill much farther down. And then companies start testing how far they can go down, how far they can drill. Okay. And again, who cares about the natural gas? It wasn't until the 1940s, around the 30s and 40s, when metallurgy and the war, like, and rolled steel technology came to fruition, that natural gas pipe really took off. And I know they built oil pipes and such, but keeping gas, oil pipe, okay, but you're going to have a lot of gas seeping out. And if you want a long pipeline, that's going to be hard to do with natural gas. Because of the welding techniques that the war developed, and metallurgy, rolled steel, we were able to construct gas-tight pipes now. Hey. As a result, I mean, you have steam pipes and such, right? But those are pretty small. We're talking like lengths, hundreds of miles of pipe, to transport stuff. Gas pipes in your building are pretty short by comparison. And the first natural gas fields were in New York. And they just stick pipes in the ground again. And then hopefully you were out of pocket and some natural gas would come out, right? So that was it for a long time. And you could go at different shale depths with oil. You could drill then, and then you could drill a bit deeper, and then you could drill a bit deeper, put a well over here, drill. And in fact, in my area, in like the 80s, they came in, and basically what you do is you just drill a bunch of holes. And hey, we hit oil. And if you look at the USGS, if you look at the Railroad Commission map of dry holes and like plugged wells or, currently producing or shut-ins, they basically just kind of drilled a whole bunch in the area. When they struck, they say, hey, we struck it. So that was interesting. And then technology starts developing for seismic data, petrophysics data, all this other stuff in addition to the traditional geological methods. But you had imaging, and resonance technology, electrical impedance technology, which improved. And battery technology is improved, and you're able to take this technology out further. As a result, you could better survey the areas and estimate things. And then what happened along with that is the shale revolution. And this is what really affects us. It's called the shale revolution. This was in my lifetime. This happened around 2003, was the shale revolution. So beforehand, they did start... Beforehand, they did start to do horizontal drilling. That's horizontal drilling, where you go this way. And this kind of opened up the world because you no longer needed just one little pocket. And hopefully there was enough natural occurring fractures in the rock where there was drainage. Or you hit like a little underground cave and there was a pocket of something. This kind of revolutionized it because you were able to go distance. And hopefully there's natural fractures in the rock. Natural cracks. That instead of being limited to just this little area, now you had a wide range. And according to this Barnett USGS shale study, you had about a 200 acreage worth of drainage. So if you looked at the property in a bird's eye view where this pipe was, about 200 acres around this pipe, or 140 acres around this pipe at this point, that was your drainage, your area of drainage. So the fracturing in the rock was very good. And you didn't have to do what's called hydraulic fracturing, which is actually still an advanced technique of drilling. So now you can do these. And this is still called conventional, by the way. This is still called conventional because you can just go in there horizontally and get it. That's your conventional play. If there's enough natural fractures in the rock, that's going to be your conventional play. So beforehand, back in the day, there's only conventional plays. Then they started doing horizontal drilling, which was conventional plays because you're still in the shale. It's still naturally taking the oil out of the naturally fractured shale. That was conventional. And this kind of what really set off the revolution was this horizontal drilling, which happened in my lifetime. And things sort of opened up. And where I live in the Barnett Shale, the rock is pretty well fractured down at that area. So as a result, you could just go in horizontally. And in fact, in my area, there was quite a few horizontal wells permitted. At the southern end of the East Newark gas field, there was quite a bit of permits there. There were some horizontal wells, and I'll show you here in the video of me snooping around. I went to 2 horizontal well sites. They said that they were active, but they did not look active at all. The piping and stuff on them were pretty old. It looked like it hadn't been maintained in a few years. But this was put in 2006. So 2006 is when these wells were put in. 2006-ish. Isn't that crazy? But they were horizontal wells, not fracked. We'll get into that. You just drill horizontally. The shale is naturally fractured. And then the gas just kind of drains into the pipes. Up you go. It's great. So that's horizontal drilling. And now we get to the unconventional plays. And then they discovered fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, which is how you do unconventional plays. Conventional plays, the fracking, the shale's naturally cracked and there's oil seeping in there or gas or whatever. Some sort of hydrocarbon is in these cracks. Not all cracks have hydrocarbons in them too. It's actually pretty specific hydrocarbons and when they happened, and we'll go over that in history. So, unconventional is like this. And there's gas in there, but it can't really move because there's no it can't really drain because there's no fractures in the rock. Instead, it's like this. This is the gas, how it looks. Because the porosity of this rock is pretty tight. It's like a tight porosity. It's like this. And instead of little streams of gas in the fractures of the rock, it's now like this, just little peppered stuff hanging around. Maybe you get a little kind of fractures here and there. But that's where your hydrocarbons in the unconventional play. So how do you get it? We go in and you do what's called hydraulic fracking, which you take a fluid, some sort of viscous substance, and you pump it in and you shoot it out and it fractures the ground. It causes these fractures, and then all of a sudden, it's these little tiny fractures like this. Well, they're not little, but some are big, some are small. Now, once you fracture the ground, naturally things crumble. Like if you break a mirror, fracture a mirror, it's gonna cave in, right? It might cave in. You just drilled the hole and now you fracture, it's gonna cave in. How do you prevent the rock from caving in? Here's where the fracking sand comes in. So once you fracture the ground, you have to shore it up, right? I don't know if your family was miners or not. When you drill for a mine, you got to shore it up. This is how you shore it up. It's called fracking sand. So you go in and you pump it full of sand, and the sand props it open, and then the sand particles allow for the hydrocarbons to kind of seep on out. And that's your unconventional play right there. And when they talk about conventional, unconventional plays. So conventional is going to be your easy to get to oil and gas. And if you look at the Oro Grande, they talk about conventional, unconventional plays. The unconventional plays require a bit of more hydraulic fracking. But again, this technology is available to us now. It hasn't been available to us before, but now it is. This is controversial, of course, because it causes some earthquakes in some areas, among other things. But as hydrocarbons become more scarce, this is a way to do it. And there was a study done in the Permian a while ago, and this is what kind of revolutionized it. Again, Rich Masterson was one of those people where they discovered that there was an additional about 20 billion barrels of oil. And we're talking like, this is like 2014, basically during the OPEC thing, where they're like, oh, wait, there's all this oil here, and it kind of rivals Saudi Arabia. Because now we're looking at unconventional plays. There's way more oil. Okay. Whew. So yeah, when I was younger, when you were younger, it was like, oh, we import our oil from Mexico. Oh no. So because of the unconventional play, the revolution, in addition to horizontal drilling technology and hydraulic fracking technology, the U.S. has become more independent on its own oil production. When I was in college, my statistics teacher was actually big on explaining to us the process of importing oil from Venezuela and Mexico. So that's your unconventional plays. In the Barnett, so far, it's more or less conventional, but horizontal drilling. And during my adventure, I drove through, I'll try and put it up here. I drove through this particular road, which was going to be a big old field, and they came in 2006 and surveyed and permitted it, and it was ready to go for this pretty impressive looking field. But then they decided to focus more on the north end of things. Barnett. So they originally started doing the horizontal in Barnett, and then that was applied to the Marcellus Shale. And here's where people go, Bird Lady, you live in Texas. What about propane? Let me tell you about some propane. So before, like I said, the war, I mean World War II, metallurgy and rolled cold steel, and you're not going to have these big gaseous pipelines. That really came into the country post World War II into the 70s. And then natural gas was used more as cooking and heating in that time period. Beforehand, if you needed gas, it would be natural gas from coal. But the pipes would be much smaller, be much more localized, or you truck it in. Out here, before propane came about, you had butane. So before the propane revolution hit, because of the natural gas revolution, propane's a byproduct of natural gas. And natural gas and petroleum refining, when you do that, you can use that as, you can get those products as propane. Again, let's give a round of applause to Rockefeller, J.D. Rockefeller, who, again, Cleveland. He lived in Cleveland for a while because of Standard Oil Company and the refineries of Cleveland. Again, Cleveland's always been polluted. The whole area I grew up in, even before, it was really colonized and revolutionized industrially. The Native Americans noted the pollution that Mother Nature put into Lake Erie. So Rockefeller had Standard Oil, and he revolutionized byproducts and turning those, just you throw it out anyways, into useful commodities. As a result, this is where, when natural gas itself started taking off, you started getting more propane. And once natural gas pipelines came into play, propane took off. Before, it's butane. And let me go out today, and I'll put it in here. I'm actually going out. It's right in my front yard. There used to be an old home site, and there's an old butane tank that's in the ground. So before propane, out here you had butane. Just a little bit of history. Once natural gas revolution started, then you had more propane products, and they were going to, in my particular area, drill a lot more natural gas wells. Fortunately, they went to North Barnett after the OPEC agreement. Well, first the first economic downturn, then the OPEC. They went to North Barnett with the oil, and then they went to Eagle Ford and started doing work there. And hopefully my friend responds soon with Eagle Ford. That's a brief history of the area, more or less, and that kind of catches you up to speed. And a lot of the reasons why these properties sat empty for so long, one, it was economic conditions, but we can't blame it on the economic conditions. I know that's a crutch. Two was lack of, you're not as improved today. A lot of people think oil has been around forever because gasoline's been around now for over 100 years. No, that doesn't matter. Yeah, people have been digging for oil since 1860, but that was very small, and it was very slow and long, and there wasn't as much of a demand. The technology for hydrocarbons that you know today is very recent. It's been under 20 years, and it really started to develop in about 2007. So the technology you know today started to really develop in 2007. And even since 2007, the way you can estimate and do geological surveys and petrophysics reports have greatly improved, because in 2016, USGS did a new survey of a lot of things. The Barnett Shale turns out has a lot more gas. There's been a lot of technology, battery technology, where you can go out in the field and do a lot more things. Electrostatic, impedance testing, a lot more resonance testing in your petrophysics report. That has improved. So it's a culmination of drilling techniques, hydrofracking, shoring it up with the fracking sand, and as McCabe reported on some of those unconventional plays in the Ore Grande, you needed a bit more extra sand because the pressure, it was under a great amount of pressure. So, but you were able to get extra sand if you could push extra sand in there. It was great. It was the pressure from the oil, but then you had to put extra sand in there to shore it up. Again, even the oil coming out, the pressure of the oil coming out can collapse those fractured rock cores. So you have to get special sand that you can pack up in there. That technology has improved. We wouldn't have known this technology 20 years ago, essentially. As a result, it's an amalgam of all these things, and now the new demand for oil, which has brought us to a head of Shale Revolution Part 2. You know, you had Shale Revolution Part 1, but then you had a whole bunch of, like, series of economic events and the lack of oil. And they're like, oh, we're running out of oil. But then now you have Shale Revolution Part 2 and all these techniques, and all of a sudden you can extract a lot more oil. We're more independent in our own oil production, US-wise, which is good for these companies. Good for these plays. It's more money for these companies, more money for your oil plays and your energy plays. Okay, next episode, we're going to talk about the history of Barnett. So you think oil and dinosaurs, that's actually not usually the case. It's mysterious and scary ocean creatures and oil and mass extinctions. And it's these combined that create the oil and hydrocarbons that you know, such as the Permian, the Barnett, which is a Mississippian era. It was a lot of hot and cold, going to hot and cold. And because it went to hot and cold so quickly, mass extinctions, and then it was in a shallow sea, so it was able to be covered up by silt pretty easily, because now those creatures who had moved the silt are kind of dead. And they just got covered up in silt and mud, volcanic activity that created the oil that you know today. The dinosaurs were pretty recent. I mean, if you go to the Permian, you're going to get some lizards in there, you know, some amphibian. Where the Barnett is, amphibians were just now coming to play, is when amphibians were coming to play. Or the Marcellus is, this is pre-amphibians. So we're just talking like fishes, coral life, sea life in the Marcellus, insects maybe, if it was on land. But it's a lot of sea-based life that just kind of gets covered up. We will talk more about the geology of Barnett, and we're going to do Permian geology. We're going to talk about like like particular geological periods your stuff comes from, why it comes from, like what was the mass extinction event that caused it. Again, it's a lot of heating and cooling from different reasons. And then we're going to talk about the Eagle Ford too, might as well. That's a Texan, as I said. That's what I'm familiar with. And then some Marcellus, but more or less Texan, Arkansas, Louisiana. Mississippi is kind of cool. It has that low S soil. All right, guys, I'm rambling now, but I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.